Imagine waking up to a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever seems out of place. The birds are singing. Children are getting ready for school. Neighbors are leaving for work. Everything appears perfectly normal. Then suddenly, police cars race into the neighborhood. Ambulances arrive moments later. Officers surround a family home while frightened neighbors watch from a distance, wondering what could have happened. Inside that house, investigators make a horrifying discovery. 3 members of the same family are dead. Another is barely alive. And the only surviving son tells a terrifying story. He claims that a mysterious masked gunman broke into the house before sunrise, shot everyone, and somehow disappeared without leaving a trace. At first, the story sounds believable, but as detectives begin piecing together the evidence, tiny inconsistencies begin to appear. The physical evidence doesn't match. The timeline doesn't make sense. And the teenager's behavior raises more questions than answers. Within hours, the shocking truth begins to emerge. The killer wasn't a stranger. The killer had been inside the house all along. It was 16-year-old Brian Britton. How could a teenager who had lived an ordinary suburban life turn a family home into a crime scene? Was this an act of sudden rage? Had the warning signs been missed? Or was there something far more complicated happening beneath the surface? Even today, decades later, the case continues to leave investigators, psychologists, and true crime followers asking the same difficult questions. Because sometimes, the greatest danger doesn't come from outside the home. Sometimes, it comes from within. The year was 1989. Across America, the late 1980s were a time of rapid change. The Cold War was nearing its end. Popular culture was dominated by action movies, rock music, and home video recorders. Neighborhoods like the one where the Britton family lived were often viewed as safe places where families could build quiet, ordinary lives. The Britton family appeared to fit that picture. From the outside, they seemed like an average American household. Neighbors would later describe them as a family that largely kept to themselves. There were no obvious signs that the home would soon become the scene of one of the area's most shocking crimes. Living in the house were Dennis Britton, the father, Marlene Britton, the mother, their teenage son Brian, their daughter Sherry, and their youngest child, Jason. Like many families, they had disagreements from time to time. Raising teenagers is rarely easy, and arguments over school, responsibilities, and discipline are common in households around the world. Nothing about those ordinary family conflicts suggested they would end in unimaginable violence. But behind closed doors, tensions had reportedly been growing. Brian had been struggling with school and discipline. Family members were becoming increasingly concerned about his behavior. Although many teenagers experience conflict with their parents, investigators would later conclude that something far more serious had been building beneath the surface. The events that unfolded on that March morning would forever change the lives of everyone connected to the Britton family. When police first arrived, they were dealing with what appeared to be a home invasion gone terribly wrong. A teenager claimed that an armed intruder had entered the house before dawn. According to his account, the gunman had opened fire on his family before fleeing. In situations like these, every second matters. Detectives immediately began searching for a suspect who, according to Brian's story, could still be somewhere nearby. Roads were watched. Officers questioned neighbors. Investigators searched for anyone who might have seen a suspicious vehicle or stranger in the area. But almost immediately, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Experienced detectives know that crime scenes often tell a story more reliable than eyewitness accounts. Blood patterns, shell casings, the position of victims, the timing of emergency calls. Every detail matters. And as investigators carefully examined the Britton home, they realized the physical evidence was telling a very different story. One by one, Brian's statements began to fall apart. Simple questions became difficult for him to answer consistently. Details changed. Timelines shifted. The evidence pointed away from an unknown intruder and towards someone who already knew the house, someone who knew exactly where every family member would be that morning. It didn't take long before investigators confronted Brian with the contradictions. Eventually, the truth began to surface. The horrifying mystery that had gripped the community would soon become even more shocking than anyone had imagined. Because the greatest mystery was no longer who committed the crime. It was why. How does a 16-year-old reach a point where he turns a weapon on the people closest to him? Could the tragedy have been prevented? Were there warning signs that were overlooked? Or are there some cases where the answers remain forever incomplete? In this documentary, we'll carefully examine the life of Brian Britton, the events leading up to the murders, the investigation that exposed the truth, the courtroom battle that followed, and the lasting impact this tragedy had on everyone involved. This is the story of one of the most disturbing family murder cases of 1989, and it all began with what seemed like just another ordinary morning. Before the gunshots echoed through the Britton home, there was a family trying to live what appeared to be an ordinary life. From the outside, nothing about the house suggested that it would soon become the center of one of the area's most shocking criminal investigations. The family lived in a quiet neighborhood where people generally knew one another, children played outside, and serious violent crime was uncommon. At the center of the household were Dennis and Marlene Britton. Like many parents, they worked hard to provide stability for their children. Friends and neighbors later described them as caring parents who wanted the best for their family. There was no public reputation for extreme violence or criminal activity inside the home. The Brittons were raising 3 children, each at a different stage of life. The oldest was Sherry, who was beginning to build her own future. The youngest was Jason, just 8 years old. Family members remembered him as an energetic child with his whole life ahead of him. No one could have imagined that his future would be cut so tragically short. Between them was 16-year-old Brian Britton. Like many teenagers, Brian faced the pressures of adolescence. School, family expectations, and the uncertainty of growing up can create emotional stress. Many teenagers argue with their parents or struggle academically, but those challenges alone do not explain acts of extreme violence. As investigators later pieced together Brian's life, they found signs that he had become increasingly withdrawn and difficult to discipline. Reports indicated there had been repeated conflicts at home, particularly over school attendance and household rules. One issue seemed to surface again and again: school. Brian reportedly resisted going to school, and arguments with his parents became more frequent. To many families, disagreements over education are familiar. Parents want their children to succeed, while teenagers sometimes push back against authority. But in the Britton household, those conflicts were becoming more intense. Looking back, it's easy to wonder whether anyone could have predicted what would happen next. The truth is far more complicated. After tragedies like this, people often search for clear warning signs. They replay every conversation, every disagreement, and every unusual behavior, hoping to find the moment when everything could have been prevented. But human behavior is rarely that simple. Many people experience anger, frustration, or family conflict without ever becoming violent. That's why cases like Brian Britton's continue to challenge psychologists and investigators. They remind us that there is rarely a single cause behind such devastating acts. Another detail that attracted attention after Brian's arrest was his fascination with military themes and the fictional action hero John Rambo. Investigators found military-style clothing and Rambo-related items among his belongings, and Brian reportedly referred to himself as Rambo during questioning. It's important to be careful when interpreting details like these. Enjoying action movies or military stories does not make someone violent. Millions of people watch the same films without harming anyone. Investigators viewed Brian's interests as one piece of a much larger picture, not as the cause of the crime itself. As the morning of March 22, 1989 approached, No one outside the home knew that the family was only hours away from disaster. The neighborhood remained peaceful. People slept soundly. Parents prepared for another workday. Children got ready for school. Inside the Britton home, however, tensions were about to reach a point of no return. Before sunrise, events unfolded that would destroy an entire family in just a matter of minutes. When daylight finally broke, 3 people would be dead. One would be fighting for her life, and a community would be left struggling to understand how such unimaginable violence could happen inside what seemed to be an ordinary home. March 22, 1989. It was still dark outside as most of the neighborhood slept. Nothing seemed unusual. There were no reports of suspicious people walking the streets, no signs of forced entry into homes, and no indication that anything out of the ordinary was about to happen. Inside the Britton home, however, the morning would unfold in a way no one could have imagined. According to investigators, the tension that had been building between Brian and his parents finally reached a breaking point. Authorities later said the dispute centered on Brian's refusal to go to school, an issue that had caused repeated arguments within the family. What happened next took only minutes, but its consequences would last forever. Investigators concluded that Brian armed himself with a shotgun inside the house. The first victims were his parents, Dennis and Marlene Britton. They were shot before they had any real opportunity to escape or defend themselves. The violence didn't end there. Brian then turned the weapon on his younger brother, Jason, who was only 8 years old. The child had no chance to understand what was happening around him. Finally, Brian shot his older sister, Sherry. Unlike the others, Sherry survived despite suffering severe injuries. Her survival would become one of the most important parts of the investigation, although in the immediate aftermath, no one knew whether she would live. When the shooting stopped, the house fell silent. Instead of immediately admitting what had happened, investigators say Brian tried to create a different story. He contacted authorities and claimed that a masked gunman had entered the house before dawn, opened fire on his family, and escaped. For responding officers, this was an emergency involving an armed suspect who might still be nearby. Police rushed to secure the area. Ambulances arrived within minutes. Paramedics entered the home and began treating the victims they could still save. Sherry was transported to the hospital in critical condition, where doctors worked to save her life. Inside the house, however, there was nothing they could do for Dennis, Marlene, or young Jason. They had died from their injuries. Outside, neighbors watched in disbelief. Many had gone to bed the previous night believing everything was normal. Now, flashing police lights filled the quiet street, and rumors spread quickly through the community. Had a dangerous killer escaped? Was the neighborhood still at risk? Those questions weighed heavily on investigators as they began processing the crime scene. But experienced detectives know that physical evidence often reveals details that witnesses cannot. As crime scene specialists examined the home, they looked at every shell casing, every bloodstain, and every room. They searched for signs that an unknown intruder had entered or fled the house. What they found, or rather, what they didn't find, immediately raised doubts. There were no clear signs of forced entry. The evidence inside the home didn't fully support Brian's account, and as detectives continued interviewing him, they noticed inconsistencies that became harder to ignore. The teenager appeared calm at times when investigators expected someone who had just witnessed such a horrific attack to be deeply distressed. While grief affects everyone differently, and behavior alone cannot determine guilt, detectives combined their observations with the growing body of physical evidence. The pieces no longer fit Brian's story. Hour by hour, the investigation shifted direction. Police were no longer focused only on finding a mysterious masked gunman. Instead, they began asking a far more unsettling question. What if the killer had never left the house at all? That single question would change the course of the investigation, and before long, Brian Britton's story would begin to unravel completely. A story begins to fall apart. As emergency crews worked inside the Britton home, detectives began what would become the most important part of the case, separating fact from fiction. At first, Brian Britton was treated as the only surviving son of a family that had been attacked by a violent intruder. Officers needed every detail they could get. Who was the gunman? What did he look like? How did he get inside? Which direction did he run? Brian claimed that a masked man had entered the house before dawn, opened fire on his family, and then disappeared. If that story were true, police were dealing with a dangerous killer who was still on the loose. Patrol officers searched the surrounding area. Neighbors were questioned. Investigators looked for footprints, tire tracks, fingerprints, and any evidence that someone had entered or left the property. But the evidence wasn't supporting Brian's version of events. Crime scene investigators found no convincing signs of forced entry. Doors and windows showed no clear indication that a stranger had broken into the house. Then came another problem. The physical evidence inside the home, the placement of shell casings, the trajectories of the shots, and the sequence of events suggested by the scene, didn't match the story Brian had told. Detectives had seen this before. When people invent a story under stress, they often struggle to keep every detail consistent. Small contradictions begin to appear. Timelines change. Descriptions become vague. During repeated interviews, investigators noticed exactly that. Brian's account began to shift. Details that seemed certain earlier suddenly became uncertain. Some answers contradicted what he'd said only hours before. The more detectives questioned him, the more difficult it became to reconcile his story with the evidence collected from the house. Investigators didn't rely on one inconsistency alone. Instead, they compared every statement with the forensic evidence. They looked at the timing of events. They examined where each victim had been found. They studied the shotgun and other physical evidence recovered at the scene. Slowly, the picture became clearer. The evidence pointed not toward an unknown intruder, but toward someone already inside the home. As the pressure mounted, detectives confronted Brian with the contradictions. They explained that the crime scene simply didn't support his account. At first, he continued to deny involvement. But experienced investigators knew that facts are difficult to argue with. One piece of evidence after another weakened his explanation. Eventually, Brian's story collapsed. He admitted that there had been no masked gunman. The horrifying home invasion had never happened. According to investigators, Brian confessed to shooting his father, his mother, his 8-year-old brother, and his older sister. The confession stunned everyone involved in the case. Just hours earlier, police had been searching for an unknown killer. Now they were arresting the family's own 16-year-old son. News spread quickly across the community. Residents who had feared a stranger was roaming the neighborhood now faced an even more unsettling reality. The tragedy hadn't come from outside the house. As detectives continued their investigation, they searched for a motive. Why would a teenager kill his own parents and siblings? Authorities pointed to the escalating conflict over school attendance and discipline as the immediate trigger. However, investigators and later court proceedings made it clear that no single argument could fully explain the scale of the violence. There was no simple answer. The case would soon move from the crime scene to the courtroom, where prosecutors and defense attorneys would present very different interpretations of Brian's actions. One side would argue that the murders were deliberate and calculated. The other would examine Brian's mental state and his age, raising difficult questions about responsibility, intent, and justice. Those questions would shape everything that happened next. With Brian Britton's confession, the investigation entered a new phase. The question of who had committed the crime had been answered. Now, the justice system had to determine why it happened and what punishment was appropriate for a 16-year-old who had admitted to killing members of his own family. The murders shocked not only the local community, but also people across the United States. Cases involving teenagers were always difficult, but this one stood out because nearly an entire family had been wiped out in a matter of minutes. As prosecutors prepared their case, they argued that the evidence showed Brian had acted intentionally. According to investigators, he armed himself with a shotgun and systematically attacked his family before attempting to mislead police with a fabricated story about a masked intruder. From the prosecution's perspective, the false story demonstrated consciousness of guilt. Rather than immediately admitting what he had done, Brian tried to divert investigators toward an imaginary suspect. The defense, however, faced a different challenge. Brian was only 16 years old. His legal team examined his emotional state, his background, and the circumstances leading up to the shootings. They sought to explain, not excuse, the events that had unfolded, raising questions about his maturity and state of mind at the time of the crimes. The courtroom became a place where two very different narratives collided. One focused on the devastating loss suffered by the victims and the calculated actions that followed. The other examined the psychology of a troubled teenager whose decisions had permanently destroyed his own family. For the surviving relatives and members of the community, the legal arguments offered little comfort. Nothing said in court could bring back Dennis, Marlene, or 8-year-old Jason. And then there was Sherry. She had survived the attack, but survival came at an enormous cost. She carried not only physical injuries, but also the emotional trauma of knowing that the person responsible was her own brother. Her recovery would continue long after the courtroom proceedings ended. As the trial moved forward, jurors were asked to consider the evidence carefully. The confession, the forensic findings, the fabricated intruder story, the devastating consequences of Brian's actions. After hearing the evidence, the court found Brian Britton guilty. The judge imposed a lengthy prison sentence, reflecting the extraordinary seriousness of the crimes, while also taking into account that Brian had been a juvenile at the time of the murders. For many people, the sentence marked the end of the criminal case. But for the Britton family, there was no real ending. A family had been shattered forever. A neighborhood would always remember the flashing lights outside that quiet home. And one surviving sister would spend the rest of her life carrying memories that no one should ever have to endure. Yet even after the verdict, the story was not over. Years later, Brian Britton would seek release from prison through parole hearings, forcing the tragedy back into the spotlight and requiring the surviving members of his family to relive the events once again. When the courtroom doors closed and the media attention faded, Brian Britton disappeared into the prison system. For the public, the case gradually became another headline from the past. But for the people directly affected, time did not erase the tragedy. Every birthday, every holiday, and every family gathering became a reminder of those who were no longer there. Inside prison, Brian began serving the sentence imposed by the court. Like many inmates serving long sentences, he became eligible to appear before a parole board after serving the minimum time required by law. A parole hearing is not an automatic release. It is a formal review in which a board considers factors such as the inmate's behavior in prison, acceptance of responsibility, rehabilitation efforts, and the impact on victims and their families. For the surviving members of the Britton family, these hearings reopened wounds that had never fully healed. Each hearing forced them to revisit the events of March 22, 1989. One voice, in particular, carried immense weight: Sherry Britton, the only family member who survived the attack. Sherry had lived through the unimaginable. She had awakened to violence, suffered life-threatening injuries, and lost her parents and younger brother in a single morning. Now, years later, she faced the possibility that the person who caused that devastation might one day walk free. During the parole process, Sherry expressed her opposition to Brian's release. Her message was deeply personal. She described the lifelong emotional impact of the murders and the lasting pain left behind. For her, the tragedy had never truly ended. While Brian had spent years in prison, she had spent those same years rebuilding a life forever marked by loss. The parole board had to weigh many factors. Had Brian shown genuine remorse? Had he accepted full responsibility for his actions? Did he pose a continuing risk to society? And just as importantly, what would justice mean for the surviving victim and the memory of those who were killed? These are difficult questions with no easy answers. Some believe that people, even those who commit terrible crimes as juveniles, can change through time, reflection, and rehabilitation. Others believe that certain acts are so devastating that no amount of time served can outweigh the harm that was done. The Brian Britton case sits at the center of that debate. It raises uncomfortable questions about punishment, forgiveness, and whether redemption is possible after unimaginable violence. Regardless of where people stand, one fact remains unchanged. Nothing can undo what happened inside the Britton home that March morning. Dennis, Marlene, and young Jason never had the chance to grow older. Sherry never had the opportunity to return to the life she knew before the attack. And Brian Britton would forever be remembered for the decisions he made at just 16 years old. As the years passed, the case continued to be discussed by criminologists, psychologists, and true crime researchers, not because it offered clear answers, but because it highlighted how complex family violence can be. Sometimes, the biggest question in a case is not what happened, it's why. And in the Brian Britton case, that question still echoes decades later. More than 3 decades have passed since the events of March 22, 1989. The flashing police lights are gone. The crime scene has long since been cleared. The news cameras packed up years ago. But for those who lived through the tragedy, the passage of time has never erased what happened. Cases like Brian Britton's often leave behind more questions than answers. Investigators were able to determine who committed the crime. The courts delivered a verdict. A sentence was imposed. Yet one question continues to linger. How does a family reach such a devastating point? Experts who study family violence often caution against searching for a single explanation. There is rarely one event, one argument, or one moment that fully explains a tragedy of this magnitude. Instead, these cases usually involve a complex combination of personal, emotional, psychological, and situational factors. That complexity is one reason the Brian Britton case continues to be remembered. It reminds us that appearances can be deceiving. From the outside, the Britton family looked like many others. Their home was in a quiet neighborhood. Their lives appeared ordinary. No one outside the family could have predicted that one morning would end in such unimaginable loss. The case also illustrates the challenges investigators face when arriving at a crime scene. Brian's first account pointed police toward a mysterious masked intruder. Had detectives accepted that story without carefully examining the evidence, the truth might have remained hidden much longer. Instead, they relied on forensic science, detailed interviews, and patient investigative work. The physical evidence spoke louder than the original story. It was that evidence, not assumptions, that ultimately revealed what had happened. The tragedy also left a lasting impact on conversations about juvenile offenders. When someone commits a violent crime as a teenager, society faces difficult questions. How much responsibility should be assigned to a juvenile? Can young offenders truly change over time? How should the justice system balance rehabilitation with accountability? There are no simple answers. People continue to disagree, and those debates remain active today. For the surviving members of the Britton family, however, these legal and philosophical questions are deeply personal. Their loss is not an abstract discussion. It is a reality they have lived with every day since 1989. Perhaps the greatest lesson from this case is the importance of paying attention to emotional struggles before they escalate into crisis. While most family disagreements never lead to violence, unresolved emotional distress, behavioral changes, and serious conflicts should never be ignored. Seeking help is not a sign of weakness. For many families, early support from trusted relatives, counselors, teachers, or mental health professionals can make a meaningful difference. Of course, no one can say with certainty whether any intervention would have changed the outcome in the Britton case. History cannot be rewritten. What happened cannot be undone. 3 lives were taken. 1 life was permanently altered, and an entire community was left searching for answers that may never fully exist. As we reflect on this story, it's worth remembering the victims, not only for the way they died, but for the lives they lived. Dennis Britton was a father. Marlene Britton was a mother. Jason Britton was an 8-year-old boy with a future that was never allowed to unfold. And Sherry Britton showed remarkable resilience in surviving an unimaginable ordeal. Their lives deserve to be remembered with dignity and compassion. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary thoughtful and informative, consider subscribing for more carefully researched true crime and historical documentaries. And remember, sometimes the most haunting mysteries aren't the ones where we never learn the killer's identity. They're the ones where we do. Because understanding who is often much easier than understanding why.